Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Let's Learn ES6. My name is Ryan Christiani. I live in Toronto. I'm an instructor at HackerU, and in this video I'd like to go over a little bit of Webpack. So I was helping a student the other day, and they got a tech test and it involved Webpack, and we teach in our curriculum Gulp, but Webpack has become sort of all the rage these days for good reasons, and I kind of want to go through a little bit of what it is and how you can use it. So the goal of this video is we're not gonna very little project, very small, and we're just gonna kind of walk through configuring a simple Webpack file, Webpack configuration. So if you haven't heard of Webpack before, Webpack is a module bundler. There's a previous video on Let's Learn ES6 on modules. There'll be a description in the there'll be a link in the description below. Excuse me. What Webpack allows us to do is create all these nice little modules so we can kind of organize our app in a nice way. And then what it allows us to do is bundle them all up into individual, more condensed files. And this is great because when we're building websites, we don't want to try to send too many things over the wire at the same time, because that can slow some things down. Although with HTTP2, that's kind of changing a bit, but ideally, you'd want to kind of like condense them up. But in order to organize them, we want to use modules to make it nice and easy. So it's a modular bundler. So if you've ever used actually something like Browserify, very similar to Browserify, but what Webpack allows us to do is actually bundle up things other than just JavaScript. So we can do like styles and images and stuff like that. So that's pretty neat. And so I was going through this with a student, and I just kind of wanted to do a little video on it. So in order to get started, just move that over there. What I'd like you to do is, oops, I can never see my keyboard because of the microphone, so I make a lot of typos, but I'd like you to create a simple folder. I called mine Webpack, and we're going to have two other folders inside of there. We'll have a distribution, or dist, a source, that's where we're going to do our writing. Inside of that source, we're going to have a modules folder, so we'll make some modules and stuff like that. And we'll have a simple app.js. And also, so on the same level as dist and source, we're going to have an index.html, so just a simple basic HTML file that is going to load in a file we'll talk about in a little bit. And then we're just going to have a webpack.config.js file. Before we get started, though, you need to make sure that you have Webpack installed. So if you do not, take a second and do npm install webpack-g, so we install it globally, so we can use the Webpack command. And also, just for now, let's actually start and do npm init. If you've ever used npm, if you want to store your dependencies, so stuff like Webpack, or for us, what we're going to do is we're going to use Babel, we need to save that dependency somewhere. So if you do npm init, it allows you to kind of walk through this creation of a package.json file. And all a package.json file is, for our case at least, is sort of a manifest of dependencies, and if we have tests and scripts and stuff like that. So in terms of name, well, we probably shouldn't call it Webpack, so let's call it, well, I mean, in our case, it doesn't matter. So I'm going to call mine Webpack, let's say test. Version 1, sure. Description, you can put a description here, but because we're not really releasing this as a module or anything, we're going to leave that. Entry point, let's just leave it as Webpack config. Basically, you can kind of hit enter down here. If you're actually doing an NPM module, you'd want to spend more time filling this out, but that's okay. And when it's all good, you type yes. So what that does is it creates this little file. And again, so I mean, you could hit enter all the way here and then come back here and just kind of adjust it later. Totally up to you. Cool. Okay, so I'm just going to clear that screen. So one thing we're going to need to do first is let's actually write some code. So inside of our source file, what I'd like to do is this. Inside of the modules file, let's make a new file, and let's call it header.js. The idea here is we're going to make like a kind of a really simple kind of component, let's say, like a header component using template tags. So using ES6 modules, and again, link to the video in the description below, we'll say export default, and then we're going to make it export template literal. So we'll say header. And we can, the great thing about template literals, we can do some spacing around it. Actually, it might be nicer if we did something like this, because that should still work. Header, like that, and we'll just put like, I don't know, an H1 in there, let's say. And we'll call this my first module. or my first Webpack, perhaps. Yeah, let's do that. Bloop. There we go. Oh, no. There it is. Great. Cool. So save that. Great. So let's jump into our app.js file and let's import this. So we'll say import header from, and we want to go from this location into the modules folder. Modules / header. And we don't have to put header.js because modules are smart enough to know that it's a .js file. And maybe just for simplicity's sake, we do something like document.body.inner HTML equals header. So what should happen is header should have the value of this template string stored in it, and we're just going to throw that into the body. So we save that. Cool. We also have our index.html, and you'll notice in this index.html, again, very, very simple, we have a script, and its source is dis/bundle.js. Now, we don't have anything in the distribution folder. We have no files in there, so we're going to use Webpack to actually create this bundle and bundle that up for us. And just to prove it, if we open this up in the browser, I'm going to have to move that over here. We see we have nothing. If we open up the dev tools, obviously we're getting an error for that file. So let's get started. So let's open webpack.config.js. And in order to get started with a Webpack configuration file, we actually need to export a module. And this module is the Node style of modules, the common JS style of modules. So we say module.exports. And then we have to export an object. Now, the thing about Webpack is that it really reminds me of Grunt. If you've ever done any Grunt work, Grunt is a task builder, a task runner for JavaScript, very similar to Gulp. It was around kind of before Gulp. A Grunt file has a lot of just an object that is configuring a bunch of steps. If you remember the Gulp and Babel video, what we did in that is we kind of we require a lot of modules and we just kind of program what we want it to do. And in this case, we kind of configure for Webpack or for Grunt, we configure the module loaders and stuff like that to do what we want them to do. So the way that Webpack works is there's a whole bunch of like loaders that we can use, and we're going to use the Babel Loader in a second, but there's also some stuff that just kind of like out of the box just works. We don't have to install anything else. So inside of this object, we need the first key, or we need a key to be called entry. So what is the entry point of our Webpack configuration? And we're going to use template literals here as well, and expressions to say __ dir name. This is a node global object that will reference the directory name. So actually, if you had this open in your browser, the directory name would be this. So it'd be file or users, your name, sites, whatever you have there. Excuse me. So we want to say dir name, and we want to say /source/app.js. So that is our entry point. It's the thing that we're going to be working through, right? And then we need a second property here. Output, if I could spell. Yeah, I like that. And output is actually an object. So with output, we need to define two things in our case here. A path. So what is the output path? And again, we'll use template literal expression, dir name, and we'll say dist or distribution. Again, you could call dist and source anything you want, but in our case, that's what I'm going to call it. You could call this build. It's another common naming for that. The second thing we need here is what is the file name? What is this thing we want to call it when it actually gets rendered out? And this is kind of just taken from the Webpack documentation. We're just going to call it bundle. An interesting thing about the Webpack documentation, kind of reading through comments and kind of doing my research for this video and an article I'm writing, which I'll talk about later, is that it's a little verbose sometimes. It's not quite the easiest to read. And if you actually look at the comments, it can actually be quite, the people kind of are really upset all the time. I find that funny because when something is free like that, people get really up in arms about it. But if you do take the time to kind of sit and walk through it and kind of go through the examples, you can kind of figure it out. but hopefully I can help you figure it out even faster. Okay, so we actually have a working configuration here. We have an entry point, the app file. We have an output, where it's going to go, and what the file is going to be called. So we could actually get this going. So if we jump to the terminal, make sure, present working directory, make sure you're in your folder that you've created for this little code along. And if you actually just run Webpack, so again, make sure you've installed this. If I could type Webpack here, and you hit enter, you'll actually see that it'll run all this. So this is it kind of just telling you, oh no, I don't want to do that. This is just telling you what it did. And what it did is it created a bundle.js from our source. And if you look in that bundle.js, you'll see all of this stuff. And if you've ever looked at the output from a Browserify bundle or module, it's a very similar thing. It actually just kind of inlines everything and wraps it all up into one file. If you look at the bottom here, you can see our actual code. Import header from modules header, document.body.inner HTML. Yeah. So let's see here. So if we refresh this page, uncaught syntax error, unexpected token import. That's not good. So why did this not work? We're using ES6 modules, we're doing all this stuff. Well, ES6 modules aren't actually in browsers yet. There's actually a lot of discussion, especially in the Node community around this, on sort of like how we're actually going to do this. So modules are in the language, but there's no mechanism in browsers yet on how to actually import these. So we actually have to transpile this stuff down. So we need to include Babel here. And if we're ever doing any ES6 work and we need to include any sort of code that in browsers that do not have ES6, we're going to include Babel anyway. So I find I always say Babel. It's either Babel, Babel. I kind of keep messing them up. But yeah. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to include our first loader. Before we do that, we have to install some things. So let's jump back to our terminal for a second. And we're going to have to use npm to install. And I'm just going to do it all in one line here. If I could type install. Ooh, there we go. Cool. npm install -- save, not Dave, save -dev. We're going to need Babel core. So that's just the core of Babel. We'll need Babel Loader. The loader is actually the thing that we're going to be using. This is the Webpack thing. And we're actually going to need Babel preset ES 2015, which is just another name for ES6. And so the interesting thing about this, if you've ever done any Babel stuff in the past, is that Babel used to be, first of all, it was originally called like 5 to 6 or 6 to 5. Then it was just Babel, and it used to by default transpile your ES6 to ES5. However, it doesn't do that anymore. And actually, I think this is kind of neat because Babel is opening up this whole new world of transformations of our code. So we have to include this preset in order to do that. Again, if you want to do more work with task builders and stuff like that, or task runners, excuse me, check out my video on Gulp and Babel. Okay, so hit enter. It's going to take a second, and I'll probably just speed up the video from here. Cool, so it's all done. Now we need to configure our Webpack config. So if you didn't get any like big errors, a couple warnings here and there is fine, but there's no big errors. It downloaded all of our dependencies. It stored them in a node modules folder here. And if you actually look in your package.json, you will actually see the 3 things that we downloaded. Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to close that. I'm actually going to close header and app because all we need now is Webpack config. So I'm going to clear this screen as well. Boop. Cool. Okay, so what we need to do now is we need to add to our file. So we're going to add a new section here called module. And what module is it allows us to define stuff like loaders. There's other things we can do here, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to define a loader. Loaders. Because what loaders are, the value of loaders is going to be an array of objects that define our loaders. We're going to do one loader here, and actually in the comments below, let me know if you want to do more Webpack videos because we can do more of that. But what we're going to do is we're going to define one loader here that is going to be for our Babel stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to add an object in here, and there's a couple properties we need to worry ourselves with. So the first is going to be test. And what test is it's actually a regular expression for testing what file extension we want. And in our case here, we want the JS extension. So we want to test files and load files only with the .js extension. Next, we need to tell it what, loader do we want to do? Wow, there it is. We're going to be using Babel. So remember earlier when we installed Babel-Loader? So that allows us to, in the loader section of the loaders array, say we're going to use the Babel loader. And we can just say Babel because it will look for Babel-Loader. And then the second thing is we need to set up a query here. Now, the interesting thing with loaders is that we can actually pass query parameters to loaders. I think you could actually do it like this if you wanted. Query, or it would be like preset something like that equals, and then what we're going to do it. But I'm going to do it in this object here because it'll be nicer. So what is the query? So what we're saying is because Babel doesn't by default transpile ES6, we have to tell it we need to use this ES 2015 plugin. So we can say presets ES 2015. And that's actually it. So we have defined a new module section. We've defined some loaders for this module. And what we've done is we've defined a Babel one here. So with this in mind, let's see if this works now. So remember our bundle here still doesn't actually pull in our code. So what we should see here is our string, but right now it says import header from etc. So let's try this again. Let's jump back here. Let's do Webpack and let's hit enter. And so it's done this. It says 2 hidden modules. Interesting. And if we scroll down here, you can actually see that it's changed our code. So it live updated, and it's actually changed it to show our text. And it's kind of done some funny stuff to make that module kind of import properly, but now it should work. So if we jump back to our browser, refresh that page. Wow, perfect. So that's pretty neat. And yeah, that's pretty cool. You notice how we have to keep typing Webpack over and over again? Kind of sucks. So very similar to Grunt, there is always a watch task, Grunt and Gulp. So if we do Webpack -- watch, and you hit enter, what it's going to do is it's going to run it, it's going to compile it the first time, and then it's going to constantly keep watching. So if I went into header, for example, and I added maybe some more stuff here. This is neat. Something like that. Save that. What it'll do is it'll recompile it. We can see that down here. This is neat. And then if we go back to our browser and refresh that, perfect. Yeah, pretty cool. Now it doesn't do like the auto refresh and stuff like that, and we're not hot reloading or anything here. Again, in a future video, maybe we can look at that. But there's one more thing I wanted to show you. So this is currently loading it off of the file system, but if we're doing any other sort of work that we need a server for, we probably want to run it on a server. And so I'm just going to kill that and refresh the screen. What we need to do now is maybe use something else that'll allow us to run a server. So with Gulp, there's stuff like browser sync that will boot up a local server and actually refresh the pages and stuff for us. But if we do npm install -g, I'm not going to do this because I already have this, but if you say webpack -dev or is it development? Yeah, it's just dev. Webpack -dev server. Server. Yeah, there we go. What that will do is that it will download and install a special Webpack dev server, as it states, and that will allow us to run that, but it'll also open up a server for us, which is really neat. So again, in the same directory, if we now do Webpack dev server like that, hit enter, it's going to condense all the stuff, bundle it up for us, and you'll see here it says localhost 8080 Webpack dev server. So if I copy this and I go back to here, I'll show you that in a second, hit enter, it will load it up. App is ready. We can see our stuff here. I'm not going to get too much into the Webpack dev server, but this is the iframe mode, so it loads it up in an iframe. really quickly, if you just remove that, it'll actually load it up here. There's iframe and inline mode. And again, I think in a future video, we'll kind of go over what those do and why you would want to have one over the other. Cool. So from there, there's not much else I wanted to talk about. Well, there are a couple things I want to talk about. So that's sort of it on the first introduction to Webpack. Again, let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this. We can explore it a bit deeper. And if you go to first RyanChristiani.com, by the time I release this video, I'll actually have kind of the notes I used for this up on the blog as an introduction to Webpack. So it'll be the same stuff, just maybe allows you to take some time and read it over. I'm also going to include this in my book. So if you haven't, go over to letslearnes6.com. I've been trying to do a little bit more work on this. Register your email address so you get some information about when it's coming out. I've put up the table of contents now, so we get an idea of what's going to happen, and I'm going to add this Webpack stuff that I wrote here into the using ES6 now portion of the book. Really, it's interesting writing that chapter because a lot of this stuff is becoming super available just in the browser, but I'm going to keep it there because a lot of people don't get the chance to use all these evergreen browsers all the time, so they do have to use something to transpile it. But yeah, chapters, about 21 chapters so far. I'm going to do a sample chapter on template literals coming up really soon. There's a really neat section at the end where I look at tagged template literals or tagged templates. And we can use it to create like if you've ever used something like handlebars, like a really kind of like quick, easy, stripped down version of like a handlebars template compiler kind of thing. So really neat. So chapter coming up, or sample chapter coming up really soon. So this should be coming out within the next, hopefully month and a half, 2 months. Cool. Yeah. So again, hope you learned something. Make sure to subscribe and follow me on Twitter at rchristiani. Other than that, bye-bye.
Thank you.